The worn leather of my father's old office chair still carried the faint scent of his cologne as I sank into it, staring at the stack of accounting books spread across the mahogany desk. I was 13 the first time you brought me here, to this very spot in the back office of Carter's auto shop. Maya, sweetheart, he said, his calloused hands steadying mine as I traced the ledger's columns. One day, all of this will be yours. But first, you've got to learn how to protect it. At the time, his words didn't quite land. I was just a kid, still convinced my father was unshakable, the empire he built as solid as the concrete floor of his first garage. Back then, my world revolved around Saturdays spent watching him work, the clang of metal on metal mixing with his off-key humming of old country songs. That was before cancer, before Rebecca, before it all started to unravel. Rebecca entered our lives like the click of her high heels on the shop's concrete floor, sharp and unavoidable. Dad was still reeling from Mom's death in a car accident 2 years earlier. I was 16 when he introduced her. Maya, meet Rebecca, he said, smiling wider than I'd seen in years. She's an investment banker I met at the Chamber of Commerce. Rebecca extended a perfectly manicured hand, her red lipstick flawless. Your father's told me so much about you, she said, her voice syrupy sweet. When she patted my cheek, I forced myself not to flinch. 6 months later, they were married. I stood in the church, suffocating in the pink bridesmaid dress Rebecca had chosen, despite knowing I hated pink, watching Dad beam at his new bride. My younger brother Tommy stood beside me, fidgeting with his bow tie. She makes Dad happy, he whispered, more to convince himself than me. For a while, everything seemed fine, at least on the surface. Rebecca redecorated, stripping our house of Mom's warmth and replacing it with cold, modern pieces that belonged in a catalog. Dad didn't seem to mind. He was consumed with expanding the business. I spent more time at the shop, soaking up every lesson he had to teach, while Tommy buried himself in baseball, anything to avoid Rebecca's passive-aggressive comments and subtle power plays. Then came the diagnosis: Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months to live at best. I was 22, fresh out of business school, working alongside Dad at the shop while Tommy was away at college on a baseball scholarship. The day we got the news, I found Dad in his office, staring at the wall of customer photos. Generations of families who trusted Carter's auto shop with their memories and vehicles. Maya, he said, his voice unsteady, I need you to promise me something. He pulled a thick envelope from his desk drawer, his hands trembling. This has everything: wills, account info, business documents. Don't let anyone change what we've built here. Not even. He hesitated, his gaze flicking toward the front office where Rebecca's laughter echoed. I should have seen it coming. Rebecca's sudden interest in the shop's finances, her incessant suggestions to modernize operations, and the mysterious meetings with Dad's lawyer. But I was too focused on losing him to notice the storm brewing around us. The truth hit me one night, 3 months after Dad's diagnosis. I'd stopped by the house to drop off paperwork and let myself in quietly, assuming Dad would be resting. From Rebecca's office, her sharp, businesslike tone cut through the quiet. Listen, Charles, I don't care what it takes. Those shops are worth at least $2 million, and I'm not letting some grease monkey stepdaughter inherit everything because Richard's sentimental. I've played the devoted wife for 3 years. I deserve something for my trouble. Figure out how to change the will. Make it happen. I froze soup for Dad cooling in my hands as my world shifted. The missing documents, the secretive meetings, her constant undermining. It all made sense. That night, lying awake in my apartment above the shop, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Rebecca destroy what Dad had built. I didn't know then how much my choice would cost me or how deeply it would test everything I thought I knew about family and loyalty. That phone call was to James Richardson, my dad's oldest friend and the lawyer who had helped him set up the business 30 years ago. He was the same lawyer Rebecca had tried to replace with her more experienced counsel just 2 months after Dad's diagnosis. James' office hadn't changed in years, walls lined with legal books, the faint scent of pipe tobacco still lingering even though he quit long ago. Maya, I was wondering when you'd show up, James said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Your father told me you might come. He reached into his desk and pulled out a thick file. It's all here, his original will, the succession plans, everything legally filed and witnessed long before Rebecca came into the picture. My hands trembled as I flipped through the documents. Dad had planned everything down to the last detail. The business would be mine, with a trust set aside for Tommy to cover his education and future. Tucked inside was something else. A letter written just 2 weeks ago, its edges shaky from Dad's unsteady hand. My dearest Maya, it read, if you're reading this, then you know the truth about Rebecca. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I was blind, but I see her now for what she really is. The cancer is taking more out of me than I ever expected, and she's been relentless about making changes to the will. Don't let her undo what we've built. You're stronger than she thinks. I blinked back tears and folded the letter carefully. What do we do, James? He leaned forward, his voice low and steady. We fight, but understand this, Rebecca won't go quietly. She's already making her moves, and some of your family might side with her. Be ready for a fight, Maya. James wasn't wrong. That same evening, Tommy stormed into the shop as I was closing up, his face red with anger. What the hell, Maya? Rebecca says you're trying to cut her out of everything. She showed me a copy of the new will, one she and Dad have been working on together. Why are you doing this? Tommy, it's not true. She's manipulating you. You think I'm stupid? He interrupted. She told me how you've been sneaking around with Dad's old lawyer, trying to undermine her. You're just like Mom. Always controlling, always selfish. The mention of Mom stung like a slap. Tommy, she's lying. That will she showed you. It's fake. Dad wouldn't. Enough, he snapped, cutting me off. Rebecca's the only one who's been honest about what's going on. Maybe you should take a good look at yourself. He stormed out before I could say another word, leaving me alone in the dimly lit shop. I sank onto the nearest workbench, surrounded by the tools and engines Dad and I had worked on together. The red light of the security camera blinked steadily in the corner. One of the cameras Dad had insisted on installing last year, just in case. The cameras. My heart raced as I hurried to the security office. Weeks of footage, complete with audio, stored safely in the cloud. It didn't take long to find what I needed. Rebecca's voice, sharp and confident, discussing her plans to sell the business and deal with the Carter kids, once Dad was gone. But Rebecca was always a step ahead. The next morning, 2 police officers showed up at the shop. Miss Carter, one of them said, his tone almost apologetic, we've received a complaint about financial misconduct. Mrs. Carter provided documentation of irregular transfers. What? My mind spun. That's not possible. We'll need you to come with us, he interrupted, avoiding my eyes. As they led me out, Rebecca stood in the doorway, her phone pressed to her ear. Her expression was smug, the picture of triumph. She'd already begun spreading her narrative, painting me as a desperate, money-hungry daughter willing to steal from her dying father. The fallout was immediate. Family members turned against me. Aunt Sarah, who had always been like a second mom, stopped answering my calls. Longtime customers canceled their appointments. Even Tommy wouldn't listen to reason. But the worst part was Dad. When I visited him in the hospital, he looked frail, his once strong voice reduced to a hoarse whisper. Maya, he said, his eyes filled with pain, how could you? Rebecca showed me the proof. How could you do this to me? Dad, it's not true, I said, tears streaming down my face. Rebecca's lying, she's trying to. Enough, Rebecca interrupted, pressing the call button for the nurse. You're upsetting him, Maya. I think it's best if you leave. As I was escorted out of the room, I heard Tommy's voice, cold and full of anger. Haven't you done enough already? That night, I stared at my laptop, reviewing the footage and documents I'd gathered. I had the truth, but truth alone wasn't enough. Rebecca had poisoned the well so thoroughly that no one would believe me without something bigger. So I made a decision. I sent a single text to the one person Rebecca would never expect me to contact, her ex-husband. I met Marcus, Rebecca's ex-husband, in a small diner 50 miles out of town. He wasn't the bitter, vengeful man Rebecca had described. Instead, he was a weary accountant with kind eyes and a file folder full of evidence. She did the same thing to me, he began, spreading the papers across the table. Built up fake accusations, isolated me from my family, and ruined my business. By the time I cleared my name, it was too late. She'd already sold everything and moved on to her next victim. My hands trembled as I sifted through the documents. There it was, a pattern spanning 15 years, 3 marriages, and 4 ruined businesses. Why didn't you stop her? I asked. He gave a bitter laugh. I tried, but she's careful. She crafts her lies, makes sure there are witnesses for her stories, and plays the perfect victim. He slid one last document across the table. But this time, with you, she got sloppy. It was a loan application Rebecca had filed 3 weeks ago, using the shop as collateral. My father's signature was on it, or at least a clumsy forgery. This was signed 2 days after your dad was admitted to hospice, Marcus pointed out. He wasn't even able to hold a pen by then. My stomach churned. It's not enough. She'll say I forged this to frame her. Marcus smiled faintly. She made another mistake. The bank's loan officer remembers her signing the documents in person, and she took pictures with her phone to celebrate, pictures automatically uploaded to her cloud storage. How did you get into her cloud? I asked, amazed. She never changes her passwords. Still uses our anniversary for everything. His smile turned rueful. For all her cunning, greed always trips her up. I spent the next 3 days building an airtight case. Security footage, forged documents, employee testimonies, and bank records formed a damning timeline. Then, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to James Richardson, Dad's lawyer, who immediately filed injunctions to freeze the business assets. The second was to Officer Martinez, with the evidence of Rebecca's embezzlement. The third was to Tommy. He didn't want to listen. Rebecca says you're sabotaging her and Dad. She showed me a new will, one that's fair. What is this, Maya? Some power grab? Just meet me at the shop tomorrow, I told him. Bring Rebecca. If you don't believe me after what I show you, I'll sign over everything to you. The next morning, I sat in Dad's office, the smell of motor oil and leather grounding me. Tommy arrived with Rebecca, who was all confidence until she saw Marcus sitting quietly in the corner. What is he doing here? She snapped, her composure cracking. I turned on the large screen. He's helping me tell the truth. For an hour, I presented the evidence. Rebecca's forged loan application, her whispered calls about selling the shop, her manipulation of employees. Then came the footage, her incriminating conversations in the shop, recorded by the security cameras Dad had installed. By the time I showed her loan officer's statement and the pictures from her cloud, Rebecca's face was pale, her lawyer visibly squirming. That's enough, her lawyer said, standing. Mrs. Carter, I advise you to stay silent. But it was too late. Officer Martinez and 2 detectives were already at the door. Rebecca Carter, Martinez began. You're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and attempted grand theft. Rebecca tried to protest, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of handcuffs snapping into place. Tommy turned to me, his face stricken. Maya, I didn't know. You didn't want to, I replied gently, but it's time to tell Dad the truth. At the hospice, Dad had a rare moment of lucidity as we explained everything. When I showed him the evidence, he gripped my hand weakly. You did it, sweetheart, he whispered. Your mother would be so proud. 2 weeks later, Dad passed peacefully, knowing his life's work was safe. Rebecca went to prison for 8 years, and the family she manipulated slowly came back to me with apologies I'm still learning to forgive. Tommy and I now run the shop together. He handles the books, I handle the cars. We've opened a 3rd location and begun training the next generation of mechanics, just like Dad taught me. Late at night, in Dad's old office, I sometimes sit surrounded by the scent of leather and his cologne. His presence lingers in every tool and every lesson. Last week, a young girl came in with her father to get their car fixed. Her eyes lit up with curiosity as she explored the shop. When her father apologized for her questions, I just smiled and pulled up a step stool. Want to learn something? I asked. She nodded eagerly. Because protecting a legacy isn't just about keeping it safe, it's about passing it on.